Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the EPAC webinar on What Now, an interactive case study of workplace sexual harassment with Madhu Gupta and Margaret Michaels. Welcome to everyone who has joined us for the first time. If you are a member of EPAC, you're probably familiar with the webinar. If you're not, hopefully you'll take an opportunity to review our website and see what kind of work we do. My name is Pinu Bintani, and I am the co-host of this webinar along with Robert Zerny. We are the board of directors of EPAC, a working board of directors. You can use, for the participants, you can use your phone line to listen in to the webinar, or you could use your computer audio and a presentation to be able to view and join in the webinar. As you know, this is an interactive case study webinar. And right now, all of your voice lines are muted, but we will be opening it up as soon as the question period starts. You can also take the opportunity, should you not want to speak, but write your messages in the question box, which will be appearing at the bottom of your webinar, GoToWebinar. This webinar, as usual, will be recorded and will be hosted on our website. And a little bit about the organization, Ethics Practitioners Association of Canada. We promote ethical practices in organizations and support ethics practitioners across Canada. We hope that this organization helps you network and also, hopefully, you will get some educational opportunities to derive from here. Our vision for the organization is where people in organizations are ethically aware and act ethically. So lots of ethics, and please take some time to visit the website. You'll see the link on the GoToWebinar site. And if you're not a member, I would highly urge you to become a member. We have an excellent webinar today. It's a very topical subject, and we're very fortunate to have two really excellent experts who will be guiding us through this webinar. We'll be there to answer questions, provide guidance, and whatnot. So without much ado, I'd like to introduce you to Madhu Gupta, who is a workplace investigator and lawyer and consultant from Ottawa. She has been conducting high-profile, complex, and sensitive workplace investigations for a number of years. She has been providing expert opinions on sexual harassment cases and has been advising on proactive policy design and policy compliance. Madhu has co-authored several books, one of which is Sexual Harassment Investigations, How to Limit Your Liability. So welcome, Madhu. We are so pleased that you have found the time to be part of this webinar, and I'm sure our participants will really benefit from your expertise. Our next expert is Margaret Michaels, and I can call Margaret a veteran of the EPAC webinars because earlier in the year, Margaret had presented her work on workplace investigations, and the webinar is called Good Organizations, Bad Apples, which you can find on our website. Margaret is also based in Ottawa and has extensive experience in workplace investigations, delving into complex issues of harassment complaints on grounds covered by human rights legislations. She has written and published several articles on workplace harassment and has developed anti-harassment policies. So welcome, Margaret, and our participants today, again, will really appreciate the knowledge you bring to the table. So thank you for all those who are participating. We hope that you have read the case, which was sent to you, and we hope that this will be a robust discussion. In terms of sort of the way we will go through it, just before I hand it over to open up the voice lines, I'm just going to leave it to Madhu and Margaret to hopefully give us a summary of the case and get us started. Over to you, Margaret.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sorry, Robert here, if I just may interject for a second. Vous voyez que nos diapositives sont en français aussi qu'en anglais. Si quelqu'un veut s'exprimer en français, je vais traduire pour nos experts et pour les autres qui écoutent et lisent l'anglais. Et même si vous écrivez quelque chose, une question en français, je vais traduire pour aider la discussion. So please participate in English or French as you wish. Okay, now I'm handing over to Margaret for the summary.
Well, hello again. Thank you very much for having me back. It's a pleasure to be here. I thought it would be useful to start off with just a short synopsis of the case study, looking at what are some of the more relevant factors for us to pay attention to. So basically, Carol had been on the job for about 3 months when this particular incident happened, and she transferred to the very, very best geographical location. She's at a head office, and this is the best position for her to be in terms of career prospects. She's got a desire to succeed. She really wants to get ahead. Problem is that her working style is just not congruent. It just doesn't fit with the head office milieu. Because they tend to have a kind of 1950s male-dominated work culture, you know, that sort of thing we saw with Don Draper in the Mad Men series. People drink hard, they party hard, they don't seem to balance their home and their work life. The working environment there is very competitive, and when the fellows get together, there's crude remarks, and it's very indicative of a sexist attitudes against women. Her immediate boss, Julian Strange, he thinks that she should just go along with everyone else and get in some proper face time with the colleagues, you know, go to those extended lunches. And he tells her to build some emotional and social intelligence to add to her very good scientific brain. Julian himself, he's on track to move up to an associate partner position soon, and it's evident that he's not going to buck the system just for her. Now, Carol's own situation, her husband is unemployed and she needs her job. She knows that employees who don't cut it with senior management can get fired, even within their 6-month probationary period. She doesn't have a union to go to for support, and management, certainly in the, as Julian has talked about, doesn't appear to be supportive. On the bright side, though, the staff is comprised of 1/3 women, so she knows she can't be the only one dealing with this sexist culture. Our incident then. So she goes to see the senior partner, Anthony Oliver, but this particular incident takes place behind closed doors. And she knows that he wants and or expects her submission to his overtures. So that's the dilemma that she's in. There are, I think, the 4 characters mainly, and we've got Carol, of course, who could potentially be a complainant. We've got Laszlo, her husband. And I think that Laszlo does have a stake in this because, of course, his future is determined by what Carol does with her future. Julian Strange, she's the team leader, a practice boss, a practice chief and boss to Carol. And his interest in this is making sure that he does get that associate partner position. Anthony Oliver, our wonderful fellow, is going to be a respondent here. He's the fellow with all the authority to fire. He is a sexual predator, it would appear, and he is a user of his authority. So that's the situation that we're faced as looking at this as in terms of what the individuals need to do, what their own particular situation demands of them, and then, of course, what could potentially come out of that. Rather than talk any longer, I think I've been talking for long enough, I'd like to hand it over to Madhu and have Madhu tell us what an investigator would look at, more from the legal end of things.
All right, thank you, Margaret. Before I start, I just need a 2-second disclaimer that nothing I say is to be taken as providing legal advice. It's just general information for discussion purposes. So when I read this case study from an investigator's point of view, it raises a number of red flags for me, as I'm sure it did for you. There's a number of potential issues here, ranging from whether there is a poisonous work environment to whether it's a case of sexual harassment, or whether there's just a poor work culture. The scenario as it's written leaves open the possibilities of different results based on the details which we're not told. And we get into that question a little bit later in our discussion. But just to start, I just want to highlight some of the flags that stuck out to me. So first of all, Carol makes mention of shouting and crude remarks, with a few women joining in occasionally. So how does that affect our analysis when we investigate this case? Just because some women join in, does that mean that the behavior is acceptable? Well, this will depend on the circumstances, on exactly what was said, how often it was said, the severity of the comments, and whether or not Carol expressed any dislike. Also, were the comments gender specific? Did they target any specific individual or the way an individual dressed or looked? That might be sexual harassment. But just because an employee tolerates such comments, it doesn't mean that it's okay and that it's not sexual harassment. The next comment that really struck me was when she said, other women warned her. So there's hints there that there may be other women subjected to sexual harassment at this workplace. From an investigation point of view, the question arises whether the investigator should consider any similar fact evidence. Evidence does not have to be admissible in court before an investigator can consider that evidence. So the investigator has broader discretion there. The investigator may want to see if there was a pattern of behavior by Tony, Anthony Oliver, and the investigator would need to weigh the probative value of the evidence against its prejudicial effects. And finally, I just want to turn a little bit to the incident in Tony's office. Carol talks about there being whiskey, sitting on the couch with Tony, some vaguely threatening talk, and about being very uncomfortable. So what we need to explore is exactly what part made Carol uncomfortable. And what was threatening? Was Tony threatening her because of her low hours, or was it a quid pro quo? Like, without knowing the details, these are all open questions. Were things, said as they were literally, or did they have a hidden meaning with it? Similarly, as she says, Tony mentioned some extra performance he had extra performance indicators in mind. What did she mean by that? Here, I just want to caution that we need to ask Carol specific questions and not to assume. You need to be cautious that we don't allow our own biases, which we have based on our past experiences, to influence us, and we should be careful not to jump to conclusions. Finally, what did Carol tell her husband right after the incident? Since she told him about the incident, pretty well right after it occurred, while it was fresh in her mind, that has some value and that could be useful information. Okay, I think I'm going to turn it over to Margaret.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
If anybody has any questions at this point, just based on the remarks by Margaret and Madhu, please ask. I certainly have one question. You used the phrase probative versus some other value of the evidence.
Right.
These are legal terms that I don't understand. Can you explain them? And what was the second term?
Probative versus prejudicial effect of the evidence. I think we won't get too much into that. It's just the fact that I'll explain that we don't like to necessarily jump to using similar fact evidence. We only go to similar fact evidence when there isn't enough direct evidence and when there is evidence of a pattern of behavior. And sometimes, especially in sexual harassment cases where there isn't other evidence and you're often down to a he said, she said scenario, then sometimes we have to look to other evidence in order to make an assessment of the situation.
Okay.
Sorry, just to clarify, my understanding of probative means like useful in court?
not necessarily in court. Even for an investigator, the probative evidence, like what is the value of it? What is there going to be? What are we going to get out of it versus the prejudice that it might have on the alleged accuser, alleged harasser by taking that evidence? Because there is, as in court, like using similar fact evidence has a prejudicial effect on the alleged harasser.
Yes, I got it now.
So, but if the usefulness of that information is so critical and we can't get it from other sources, then maybe that outweighs the negatives of it.
Fair enough.
So that's the analysis that we need to do.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any questions yet, Bob?
Whoops. Nope. I'm just trying to.
Technology.
Yes, here we go. So now that I've got rid of one thing on my screen, I can go to the next one, which is the first question. So, what should Carol Lawson do on Monday morning? Que devrait-elle faire? And I know that Margaret and Madhu clearly have opinions on this, but I'd prefer to hear first from some of the opinions from the 10 people who happen to be on the line just now, taking in this webinar. So, if you'd like to offer an opinion verbally, I'll unmute your phone or your line, or if you'd like to send something by typing in the question box, please do that.
Perhaps what we could do is think of what various options are open to her and then look at the pros and cons of each. I mean, one option is simply phone in sick and keep thinking about it.
Okay, well, we don't have anything written in yet, and let me see if anybody's raised their hand. Here we do. Okay.
Oh, we have a brave person.
So I'm not going to mention names because that's not something that we normally do. We have 3 people who want to join in. So I've unmuted one of them. Can it probably show? You know what? I think I'm going to have to give names. So Ken Brander, can you tell us what's on your mind?
Yeah, sure. I think thanks for having this, first of all, by the way. I think the first reaction, of course, is that, man, Carol should go in to work and start straightening everybody out and tell her boss exactly what she thinks and, launch a formal complaint. That's the first reaction. That's what we'd like to see her do. But I think what's most important for her is to do the right thing for her. And I think one of the things she would want to consider very, very first is getting some, I think she should probably write everything down, make some good notes while they're still fresh in her mind. And then I would suggest, it would be my preference, like if my friend came to me with this scenario, I would suggest she talk with someone, a lawyer first, because once you pull that trigger at work, things are going to get very, very difficult for her, and she has to go into it eyes wide open. It's right or wrong, and that's what's going to happen. And I think she needs to get some information as quickly as she can, but write out her statement as well. It's still fresh. Thanks.
That's an excellent idea.
Yeah.
That is an excellent idea. Sometimes we're called, as investigators, we're called upon to look at incidents that happened not only 3 or 6 months ago, but sometimes a year ago or more. And it's people's memories just simply are not. They're not solid. Memories are really quite fluid. And the point you made about, once you lodge a complaint, there is no going back. Once you lodge that complaint, you've ticked off that first domino and everything in that whole line is going to fall. There's not a whole lot you can do about it. So the impact on Carol could be very, very profound, very profound.
Thank you. I'm now going to go to Feimin. Feimin,
the story. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. The story doesn't say anything about the rest of the organization, so I'm just wondering, is there a human resources department or anyone that is overseeing proper behavior?
Okay, there are 11 offices in 3 continents, so 900 employees. So I'm figuring there's going to be some sort of an HR component, not a labor relations, there's no union, but it will be a human resources function. How much teeth that particular branch of the organization has, that's up for grabs, though. We don't know that. But I would think there would be an HR process.
Well, in that case, wouldn't that be a reasonable place to start, along with, of course, taking notes and you know, making sure that you've got your own facts lined up?
Yep, that's a good option, is to go to HR. I mean, I agree with both of you that the first, like one of the first things she should do is to document what happened. As Margaret said, that having that contemporaneously created record is very valuable and will add to her credibility months later or whenever we get to that investigation. If she can show that she wrote this down at the time, and it will preserve anything that she has. Now, as far as going, it really depends what Carol wants to do, and maybe on whether she should approach HR, whether she should go to a lawyer, whether she should go to her supervisor. A lot of it depends on what she wants to see as an outcome and what she's prepared to do. So maybe, Bob, I'll let you take the next question before we get further into it.
Okay. Actually, I wanted to ask, following up Fei Min's point, do you find sometimes in your investigations that HR departments have, in a sense, bought in to a work culture that you think in general is
well, I think that goes back to my comment about we don't know how many teeth the HR department has. Some HR departments see themselves as servicing management because they know if they don't keep management very happy, their own jobs are on the line. So yes, by all means go to HR, but maybe just do some exploration first. Personally, my instinct would be to talk with the other women in the organization and find out who else has been subject to this kind of treatment. The kind of cavalier way in which Tony went ahead and was, really quite blatant. There was nothing subtle in how he was going about it. Shows to me that Carol is not his first victim or his first recipient. He's probably done this before. So I would want to go out to other women, or maybe even talk to people who've left the organization if she knows of any, and find out, have you also been on Tony's couch? What's happened to you? Has anyone gone to HR? How much credibility does HR have for the complainants as opposed to looking after management? That would be my instinct.
We did get one suggestion written, namely, I think she should go to Anthony explaining that she felt uncomfortable in person, and then follow up with an email. So this individual is saying that actually telling
him up front,
the senior manager Monday morning that back on Friday I did feel uncomfortable in your office. Explain why, and I'm going to record this in an email. And
okay, that's an option, and that takes guts, because she's drawing a line in the sand, basically. I mean, I'm quite sure Carol's eloquent enough to do this in a way that was gracious, so as not to offend. But I would think that Tony, particularly in the post-Me Too the post-Me Too environment, might get very sensitive to that. And if he's got the power to fire people, then I think Carol is sticking her neck out by doing that. It may be the right thing to do, but she's definitely putting herself in a somewhat vulnerable position.
Okay, let me just check if there's any more hands up at the moment. Just at the moment, no. So here we go. Oh, yes, here we go. Megan Turpin, would you like to make a comment?
Yes, sorry, I just want to go back to what I think it was Margaret was saying with respect to talking to others in the workplace, talking to other women and people outside the organization. That's been found to be considered mobbing or potentially bullying. So I would really caution against a situation of encouraging individuals to solicit others to discuss how they feel and what they've experienced, because it could appear, if a complaint were ultimately filed, that there could have been collusion amongst the complainants. Also, I'm a little concerned about the idea of the suggestion that she should not talk to Anthony about it. One of the first steps of most harassment processes is did you let the person know that it made you feel uncomfortable? So if we don't, I mean, if she doesn't at least indicate, now certain situations it might be too significant of an issue an incident that's occurred that it might not be wise. But I'm just a little concerned that if your advice is overarching that people should not speak to others if they're upset or offended by something that someone says, because that's the first step to trying to resolve a situation without it becoming a formal complaint. But further, the idea of encouraging individuals to essentially mobilize others to become what could be perceived by the respondent as a mob, and could actually diminish the situation that Carol is reporting or experiencing, because instead of reporting it, she's going and trying to mobilize others to join her cause and to solicit their experiences. I mean, I think that's a very risky recommendation. So anyways, I just want to leave it there.
May I respond, please?
Yeah, let's have a response, and then we'll go to the next question. Thank you very much, Megan.
My point in saying that she needs to speak with other people, it was to find out, it was basically to do some research. I don't believe I mentioned anything about encouraging them to go ahead and complain. The idea of doing research is to find out whether or not the HR department is a viable source of action. In many organizations it is, and in many organizations it is not, and I find that more definitely so in the private sector. This whole entire scenario took place behind closed doors, which, as we know, he said, she said. And as Meta pointed out earlier on, when we don't have any direct firsthand witnessing of what the situation is, you need to go to similar fact evidence. And if Carol is confident that there is similar fact evidence out there, she will know that through having done her research first. I don't know what else to say. What I'm saying, I think what I'm trying to say is, before she sticks her neck out, before she makes any sort of a move that has a very lasting impact on her future with the organization, she needs to understand it. She's only been there 3 months. She doesn't know quite how the organization responds. Anyway, I think I've made my point.
Thank you very much, Margaret. And thank you to everybody who contributed to the discussion. So here's our next question. The story does not detail how far things went in Anthony Oliver's office. Well, does it actually matter how far things went? So again, we'll wait a bit for people to put up their hands, and then I'll ask you for your opinion. Or send a question, as somebody did before. I know this text very well because I wrote it, and I must say I have absolutely no idea what the answer is. So I suppose I was successful in writing that. Well, Margaret or Madhu, would you like to make?
Sure.
Okay,
sure.
Madhu, you're going to make a point?
I can say a few words. I mean, for me, clearly, it makes a difference what happened in Tony's office. I mean, depending on the severity of what happened, there's so many different avenues we can go down. Depending on the severity, she may want to file a police report. So there's a spectrum of behavior that could have happened, to the extreme of having to file a police report to a case where if it was minor behavior, she may choose to ignore that. And we need to look at what happened to her versus what is the definition of sexual harassment, and all of her decisions going forward are going to be impacted with how far things went. There does seem to be certain, like in addition to what happened in Tony's office, there do seem, as we mentioned, some overarching issues of the workplace environment in general being toxic. But specifically, in my mind, there's no doubt it matters how far things went in his office.
One person has written in, and I think this person agrees entirely with you, Madhu. In some ways, I think it matters because it would change the charge from harassment to assault. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, it doesn't, because something is clearly wrong.
Right, like that's what I'm saying. In addition, there's something wrong with the environment, true, regardless, but her actions will be dependent on exactly what happened.
Right. Anyone else wish to contribute to this question? I know that we have more ground to cover, so if this takes care of it, going once, going twice, so then we'll use more time for other questions. Okay, well then let's go on to the next question. Suppose Carol Lawson tells Julian Strange, her immediate supervisor, about what happened, rather than going and confronting Anthony Oliver. Suppose Carol Lawson tells her immediate supervisor about what happened. What should that supervisor do? I think it's clear that, oh, here we go. Somebody's hand is up. All right, go ahead, Ken.
Hi. Well, if Julian is operating the way he should, the first thing he should do is start making some notes of the conversation he had with her and document all the details that Carol is telling him. And from there, it depends what the policies, or part of his reaction will depend what the policies are in the company. Hopefully, their policies are such that he should, be in a position where he has to report this to human resources. It's hard to say exactly what he should do beyond that, but what he definitely should not do is just dismiss Carol and just minimize what's happened. He needs to listen to her. He needs to document things, and he needs to carry it forward. He can't just sit on it. Thanks.
Yep, I agree with you, Ken. The first thing he can't do is ignore it. He needs to really listen to her.
I think that that what this the whole scenario on this particular question raises is the issue of both formal policies and informal understandings. This whole Me Too movement began in a work context where for years the traditional term casting couch was taken to vile extremes. And so one could say, if this is a similar thing to Harvey Weinstein, that there would be a bunch of Julian Stranges around who know that their interests lie in what do you call it, aiding and abetting, or
well, just willful blindness, I think, might be an expression to cover it. And I think that was something I was trying to get at earlier on, and identifying the characters. Julian Strange, I mean, okay, first off, we have policies and procedures and we have laws, There have been laws against sexual harassment since the 1970s. Okay, so please, bear that in mind. We are now, like, what, 50 years later, or can't do the math, but here we are, decades later, and we're still fighting the same sort of issues. Julian Strange may well know that the culture in his organization is wrong, but if he fights it, he's jeopardizing his own interests. He's jeopardizing a promotion because the culture that's there is entrenched. That's my sense. That's what we talk about it being a 1950s Mad Men kind of organization. I mean, he's put in his time. He's made it to team leader. He wants to make it up to the next level. His own situation. He's got a family probably has a family to provide for, and if not that at least the lifestyle he wants to maintain. So it's easy for him for his own morals to be compromised by his own need to succeed. I mean, if your entire organization willfully puts up with this situation, is someone who's like Julian the place for it to? Is there going to be a grassroots movement to try and change it? I don't know.
So here's a further comment that's come in. Does the problem boil down to a conflict between doing what is right and doing what is practical?
Perhaps it boils down to doing what is right and doing what is in one's own self-interest. Yeah. We all know what the right thing to do. Yes, there's no doubt about it, Carol needs to go to Tony and say, hey, that wasn't cool. I don't like that. But what does she risk?
I think there's a structural and governance issue here which we haven't raised, and that's the difference between the public and private sector. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And in the private sectors, you have boards of directors, which part of whose duty is to protect the interests of the organization. Sometimes they interpret that as protecting the interests of the shareholders, but let's not get into that. And they hire the CEO, and often they supervise the audit and evaluation functions. So I think perhaps you might want to comment on the opportunity for a Julian Strange, who, if he wants to protect his own interests, but at the same time do what is right, would he think about going to the board of directors rather than to Anthony, rather than to his own boss, to raise this issue, or somehow seeking protection in case there's retaliation against him for doing the right thing?
I guess that's an option, to skip level and go up.
I don't know if it's skipping level, but it's informing somebody, like in the earlier thing, informing HR is not skipping a level. It's going to another part of the organization for backup and for protection in case there's retaliation.
Right. When we look at the case study, which is 2 pages, and so many different interpretations we can make in terms of what the organization is all about. Private sector, sometimes it's not always the board of directors. I'm sorry, I'm blathering. I don't quite know what to say.
Okay, well then that's and also within the context of the public sector, you have. In the
public sector, you have unions. You have very, very well organized unions. You have a lot of public scrutiny. To my mind, working with the federal government, they're just light years ahead of certain private sector organizations. And in terms of attitude and process and all the rest of it. But in private sector, certainly see things handled quite differently. Sorry, go ahead. Okay.
Madhu, anything you wanted to tell us?
I just wanted to make a point that, if Julian, he has an obligation, because now he knows about something, and he knows about it in an official capacity. So he has an obligation to take action, whether he really wants to or not. And depending, I mean, once he consults the policy and the HR rep, or if there's a sexual harassment representative, even if Carol, let's say she says she's reluctant to participate, or she says, I don't want to participate, as a supervisor, Julian has an obligation that he can't let the sexual harassment or harassment persist. Once he knows about it, and he knows there's a violation, he has to do something. And like I said, it becomes more complicated if a victim says she doesn't want her name disclosed. For example, the company still has to go ahead, and if she says, I don't want an investigation, I don't want to go ahead, now that the company is aware that something's happened, they still have an obligation to investigate, to do something, depending on, like, it's hard to speak because we don't have the details, but they should probably still have to do something. So there might be other avenues that the employer can go ahead in making their findings, and it might be that they have to reveal who she is just based on procedural fairness to the alleged harasser, depending on which avenue they go to.
Good. We have another person who wants to speak up. Go ahead, Femin.
Hi. I thought I should comment on the private sector because that's where I'm working right now. We have an organization of compliance and ethics that stems from the board of directors. So the audit committee oversees the compliance and ethics program, and the head of the program is one of the corporate level executives. So if a person wants to go straight to the board of directors, they actually have an avenue to do that. And so in our organization, Bob's suggestion would make perfect sense. I can see the problem with this case study is that they probably don't have that kind of organization in place. So, you know, I think the long-term answer to the problem would be to go about changing the corporate culture, of course, which would probably have to would definitely have to involve the leadership at the top. What we've been finding, and I think a lot of other companies have been finding, is that it's actually good business to be an ethical company and to have a reputation for being an ethical company. It's helped our bottom line a lot in terms of we have more customers who want to work with us, we have more suppliers and subcontractors who want to work with us because they know that they're going to be dealt with fairly. And it even comes down to on the stock market, there are certain mutual funds that only choose ethical companies. There's organizations in place where you can be awarded one of the world's most ethical company awards if you have all the processes in place to deal with complaints and concerns and make sure that there's no retaliation against the people who, in good faith, report problems. So I'm sure it takes a very long time. We're still working on it. I mean, we have the complete support of management and the board of directors, but it's still very hard to convince people that they don't have to be afraid of speaking up, and that when they do speak up, that some action will be taken. It may not turn out the way they expect or the way they wanted to, but we will do our very best to come to a good resolution. And so the hope is that eventually more companies will understand that it's actually more profitable for them to take that action, that line, than it is to let their corporate cultures be unethical. So we get back to this particular problem. Given the situation and the corporate culture, and given the risks, but also given the Me Too movement and the wider society and climate right now, what do you think, so this is up to the panel and anyone else listening, what do you think are the odds of Carol getting justice if she takes this to the company? So whether she goes to Anthony Oliver or Julian or HR, as opposed to trying to go public and get in an outside lawyer. Like, do you think the risk to her by trying to deal with it at PFL is too high, or would you say that it's worth trying?
Can I just ask you a question, Feynman? Since like I'm very glad to hear that about your company. I'm going to have to ask Bob the details later. But so tell me, is this like a recent change in your organization? Like
it's been in the works.
Or since like from Ghomeshi time or from Me Too time, or has been something since like your organization kind of started? Are you more of a leader in that, or is it kind of as a reaction that you've made these ethical changes because of some of the things that have come public? And it's so, like now it's all over the media, right? Every day there's something new about somebody. I heard one, we all heard it yesterday and 2 days before. So whether it's
our organization started this initiative many years ago. I would say about 10 years ago, but it's a very large organization. We're up to 35,000 people now. So it's been a long process. You can't do this overnight. And as we go along, the reason we apply for the award is because the feedback that we get on what we can improve is so valuable that it's worth more than the award. So as we get the feedback every year from the application, we make improvements and adjustments. But it's been around for a long time.
Employee survey type feedback?
Yes, there's employee survey feedback, as well as when we apply for an ethical award, we have to fill out a long questionnaire, and they give us feedback on our processes and things that we have in place, and they suggest what we have to do to improve.
Okay. I just want to make one little comment to Margaret. And like one point that you made is that it pays off in the long run, and I agree with you completely. And not just like, one is in the avenues that you said, like, you know, that it becomes, like there's just the whole ethical bit of doing it, plus there's the whole bit about how now a lot of people want to associate themselves with you because you do it. And then there's also the financial cost of not having to pay out harassment claims.
The lawsuits.
Exactly. In Canada, even in Canada, we all have heard about like how high the awards are in the U.S., but even in Canada now, like there was a judgment for like $800,000 plus in damages. So I agree with you. In the long run, and even like it won't take very long. It does pay off to do it the right way and to prevent the harassment from occurring in the first place. Yeah.
Right. Because the whole ethical spectrum covers not just, you know, treating people fairly, but of course, being ethical about your products as well. So we also look at the lawsuits like against VW and other companies that have tried to, you know, pass off bad products on the public. It's all part and parcel of the same thing.
I think one more point that I would throw in there is succession. The demographics are changing. I confess I really don't understand this area, but talking about millennials, talking about this, that, and the other, one of the things that this company needs to think of is how many highly talented Carol or Charles people will they be getting in the future if they don't have the kind of work atmosphere where younger people want to work. I'd like to read one longer comment that's come in. Carol needs to be concerned with her own interests and not worry about trying to remedy all the gaps in her company's corporate culture. She should not be convinced or coerced to manage this complaint informally. As soon as she signals to her supervisors that she is not on board with their agenda, her career is finished anyway. I'm not a lawyer, but she needs to get one and talk with somebody who is only concerned with Carol's own best interests and getting her a remedy.
That's quite profound.
Very good comment. Thank you.
Changing corporate values takes years, and it has to be led from the top. It has to be led well from the top. I can't tell you how many investigations I've done where very senior people who really should know better are behaving in the same way as Tony does. I have done an investigation where the respondent was the director of ethics. Okay, forgive me, but I mean, like, it's yeah. Anyway,
listen, we have another 10 minutes, and so I just want to open it to any other issues that anybody would like to raise. There's contact information for Margaret and Madhu on the slide now. I'll put it up again at the end. And we have a few more things that we can bring up if nobody else wants to. Oh, here we go with another question. Whoops. Where are we? No, I think that I may have looked at everything. Okay, so again, going once, going twice. All right, so here's another point. In discussion before, our co-host Pinu asked this question. I'm going to try and here we go. Pinu, whoops. Oh.
don't we love technology?
Okay. Pinu, do you want to?
I think the question written on the slide is fairly clear. We've been discussing aspects of it, but I think if, Madhu, it would be a great time to sort of see if we can cover some of the points that we've been talking about or touching upon, and then comprehensively look at what can organizations do to better equip themselves and create a more respectful work environment.
Sure.
Okay, so the next 3 slides have some points that Madhu shared with me earlier, and I think that you'll find useful. So I'll go to the first slide here. Madhu?
Sure. Thanks, Pino. In order, and I think, a lot of these things are going to be somewhat common, things that would occur, you would think about anyway, to give it some thought, but it's nice to have it, I think, written down in a list here. So first of all, the organizations have to be prepared, like have your systems and your contact people in place and ready to act quickly when you first hear about or learn about an issue. All the complaints have to be taken seriously and acted upon promptly. Post Me Too, you need to review your policies, update them, improve them, expand them, and your policies should stress to the employees that any complaints they file will be taken seriously. As culture changes and public opinion changes, tolerance changes, and employers need to make sure that their policies and training incorporate these changing levels of acceptable behavior. What was acceptable once may no longer be acceptable. Disseminating the policies and procedures to all the employees. So employees should know how to file a complaint. They should have a copy of it, of the policy that is, or at least have easy access to it. The policy should name multiple people or positions that they can approach if a situation arises. So hopefully one of those people will be someone that a victim is comfortable in identifying and approaching. And the company, like the policy, should specify conditions that will trigger an investigation, and employees should know from the policy what the employer will likely do with their complaint. Try to offer alternatives to the victims besides formal reporting, such as having anonymous complaint boxes, having meetings between senior level management and employees, for example, without their direct supervisor at times, allow for unofficial complaints to be made. And of course, training from everyone at all levels goes without saying. The training should be tailored and targeted for the specific audience. Include bystander training. try to encourage witnesses to speak up. So if they see or are aware of something, they can encourage the victim to speak up, or they can speak up and say something directly to someone they see doing something inappropriate. And just a bit about the investigation process. Of course, the investigations, you know, they have to be objective, fair, impartial, done timely, but confidentiality is particularly key when it's sexual harassment investigations. Only those with a need to know should be privy to information about the investigation, and the alleged harasser has to be treated as innocent until proven guilty. Even, I found guilty, I should use that word, sorry. Even because rumors, even like the hint and rumors can seriously damage one's reputation. So as a company, you know, be vigilant, have your managers and supervisors trained to watch and recognize harassment, including systemic problems in the organization. Be proactive by to try to get ahead of the issues, and like some of the things we talked about with the training, maybe with town hall discussions, sending out emails, having posters up, getting your employees to sign off on having read and received the policy, having surveys. Basically, just try and prevent the harassment from occurring in the first place. Next week, like have your B models, have your senior management promote the policy and show the company's commitment and concern. For example, you can have discussions between the senior management and employees, having them stress the organized commitment, the organization's commitment, for example, and the same things I mentioned before. You could have the suggestion boxes anonymously, and maybe even, you know, depending on the size of the organization, a hotline, a company ombudsman for someone who can be neutral and that people can come to and discuss matters with. Be transparent. Let the parties know if there was a complaint filed, and let them know about the outcome. What happened with the outcome and what corrective action was taken. Now, you might or might not tell other employees, depending on the situation, exactly what happened. You may not reveal, I guess what I should say is different degrees of information depending on what happened. But often there's a rumor mill going around once a complaint is filed anyway, so sometimes it's good if there's you clear the air by maybe sending an email or something. And be leaders in the sense that go beyond what the minimum, you know, legislative standards are. Show true commitment to creating a respectful workplace by addressing some of the systemic problems and maybe having zero tolerance policies. And finally, be committed to change the workplace culture. And that could involve things like not rewarding or excusing high performance workers just because they are high performance workers who do bully or are aggressive or harass others at work. And in the long run, it will be the right choice. Promoting women, for example, I know hiring more women is great, but they should also be in powerful positions so they can act as role models to others. But okay, that's kind of my little high level. Well,
thank you very much, Madhu. That's very, very kind of you to have added in that very valuable content. So now we're at the end of our hour. Margaret, do you have any short summary point that you'd like to make?
Keyword being short, right?
Yes.
I guess one thing I would point out is that when each of us reads the case study, and the case study is 2 pages long, when Madhu and I would do an investigation, I mean, I've certainly had reports that run 200 pages. Each and every situation has its own unique set of factors that have to be taken into account. Yes, we all know the basic principles and what should happen, but there are always going to be mitigating factors in any sort of forensic work you do in terms of trying to understand what went on in a particular potentially harassment scenario. But what can I say? I mean, keep up the good work, you know. If we take the actions that we all know we're supposed to ultimately, we won't have Google walking out 3,000 odd employees around the world. I was in the paper the other day, and if I could just digress for a second here. Google, aren't they the firm that says the first law is like, do no evil? You know, and I've always thought, wow, what a wonderful philosophy to have. And yet here we have literally around the world, Google employees are working out in support of discrimination and that. Anyway, yeah. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
There's several more comments that come in that supported some of the things that were being said. And one of them is that our policy is to limit the communication of the outcome. We commit to telling the complainant when the investigation is over that we think the accused also has rights, and the decision process to reach an outcome can't always be open for discussion. That's quite realistic. Okay, Madhu, any final comment that you'd like to make?
No, thank you for having this and for including us.
And I'd like to just toss it over to my co-host here, to Pinu. Would you like to make any further comments?
No, I think, first of all, I want to thank both Madhu and Margaret. I mean, this discussion can go on forever. As we were preparing for this webinar, we just talked that, you know, if we let it, it can take many hours and we still will not have covered the entire thing. But at least from my perspective, I'm a little more hopeful about sort of these things coming to light, and organizations and individuals and organizations coming to an understanding that this is just not good business, it's not acceptable, and this should not be tolerated from all of the recent news. So I'm a person seeing a glass half full. I don't know whether seeing you know, cases and things like that, Margaret and Madhu, you feel, well, I don't know what's going on. There's more of it being brought up for investigations. But I do want to end with a huge thank you to both of you, Madhu and Margaret, and also to my co-host, Robert. And we are really delighted that there were at least 13 participants that are dropping off very quickly, so we need to shut it. But this was a very healthy discussion, and you will see on the slide that you can send your suggestions to service@EPAC-APEC.ca, and we really look forward to more comments and suggestions of how we can do things better and more useful to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Pinu, for taking the lead in organizing this. And I'm a veteran of trying to handle the technology. I think this time I kept my errors to pretty low number compared to other times. So thanks, Pinu, for all your background work. The webinar will appear on our website, depending on how quickly we can get other people doing some technical fiddles. It could be within a week or two, and be part of a permanent useful record. I'd like to end with my own glass half full comment based on what I said earlier about millennials. And one of the comments that came in was, yes, we're really stressing that as well. And perhaps that's a message to all organizations that as organizations make a very conscious effort to listen to and dialogue with their youngest employees, they'll know that that's necessary anyway, because sustainability means getting new blood in, not just expecting the people who are in their 50s and 60s to still be around when they're in their 80s and 90s. Rather, one has to do other things too. And those younger people may in fact talk about factors that are very important for everyone and not just a young person. One more. Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, the comments are coming in of an evaluative nature. I really appreciate that. So I'll leave it open a little bit more, but we'll turn off the audio. So those of you who can still send in some comments with the question pane, I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Okay, bye-bye for now, and wait for the next webinar.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.